Well, Drake, what have we learned about red cards?
They are better than white and green cards, and it's not even remotely close.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things cEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Cal.
And I am your host, Drake. Today, we're going to be talking about the top 5 red cards in cEDH. Plenty of cards that red decks play, but what are the best of the best? Do Cal and I even agree? We're going to find out. But first, got to keep the lights on.
Our merchandise is now available in our store. We have dice, coins, playmats, tokens, sleeves, and more all available. Go to playingwithpowermtg.com today and help support the channel. You can also support us on Patreon. Patrons get access to our Discord, webcam leagues, play days, early access to videos, names in the credits of our show, exclusive videos, merchandise, and even the ability to be on an episode. Is that enough perks? I don't know. There are tiers for everyone. So go to patreon.com/playingwithpowermtg and help support the show. Also, if you are interested and looking to sponsor the podcast, please reach out to Ryan's amazing email in the show notes or the YouTube description or wherever you're checking us out. It will be there. And as always, on every episode, we do a Patreon shout out. And today, that is Todd Blackford. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks for your support.
As Drake said at the top of the show today, we're going to talk about what we think are the top 5 cards, top 5 red cards in all of cEDH. We all know that red has historically had a couple of staples. They've picked up a couple more staples, especially since the year of our Lord 2019. And we're going to talk about what we think the best of the best are. But of course, first, we have some honorable mentions. Some red cards that are pretty dang good, but they're not our top 5. Drake, tell me about some of your honorable mentions.
Big fan of red cards, so I got a few honorable mentions. And to before we dive into these, part of the equation for these honorable mentions is I think there's more there. Like there's more juice to squeeze with these cards. I think the cEDH community at large, and myself included, understands that these cards are powerful, but ranking them gets a little bit harder. And for the time being, I think there's certainly, like, if you talk to everybody in cEDH, these cards are probably a little bit outside the top 5, but I'm not necessarily confident they should be. And so as a result, they've made their way under the honorable mentions. And to start with probably the most arguable of those cards, I want to talk about Birgi, God of Storytelling. And of course, the backside, the Harnfell, Horn of
Wait a second. This feels a little biased already.
Look, the card's bananas. And the more time that I have spent delving into what you can do with Birgi, the more that, I mean, not even just me, but, you know, the players around me have kind of figured out this card's way better than we thought, you know, initially, you know, when Kaldheim released, and even up to today. There's still more and more decks that are like, wait, am I supposed to be a Birgi God of Storytelling deck? And I'm talking about some of the decks that are not just like mono red decks, because most of the time I think you should absolutely have a Birgi in your mono red decks. Maybe even Godo. I don't know if they play it today. I know nothing about Godo for the most part. That's Ryan's wheelhouse. But if they don't play a Birgi, they probably should. Like, the card's really, really strong. But Kurakashima, there's a deck. Plays Birgi. That one seems intuitive. Oh, Storm, casting less spells, gonna want a Birgi, that kind of thing. But take like Rog Silas. That's a deck that didn't play a Birgi for a very long time. Today does, and would probably play a second if they could, kind of thing. And we've seen that develop into Timna Crom. The Blue Farm decks are started playing Birgi, Crom Armix, those kinds of things. The card shows that it has more flexibility outside of dedicated Storm decks. And as we spend more time being like, wait a minute, this card's just really good, the card seems to increase in power level. So I think wherever the community has landed on that card for the moment is probably lower than that card actually is on power level. It's really strong.
Yeah, there is really something to be said about the power level of a card that kind of, at its floor, gives you a 1 mana discount on all of your future spells, in a way. You have to cast your first spell, then you get a red that you can use for your next spell, get a red, use it for your next spell. But of course, the other side is wildly strong too. Harnfell, Horn of Bounty. I know a lot of people just kind of forget that's on the backside, but there are situations where you have a lot of mana and need to spin your wheels, discard some cards, exile some cards off the top of your library, go crazy.
Absolutely. And that's a good point. Is like a lot of people just read the Bergie side and forget about Harnfell. The reason the card's so good is it's not necessarily prescriptive of what you're doing with it. Like, you know, sometimes you do play the Bergie side because you have a bunch of cards you want to cast and you want that rebuy on the mana, you know, play your ring, your vault, your crypt. And it's okay. Well, 2 of those were free. One of them made an extra mana. That's kind of good. And then, you know, sometimes you just go off on a big Nas and you cast the backside, discard all the cards you just nosed that were like not very good, and now it's trivial. Now you've gone through your entire deck, and it was, you know, post Nas, all you have to do is make 5 mana and it's rolled up. And that's like, that kind of flexibility is what makes the card very hard to pin as far as its power level, and why it gets an honorable mention for me. Is it's not just, okay, Bergie in the command zone, the Storm deck that, you know, I quite enjoy, but sometimes it is just like, okay, here's a more mid-rangey deck that sometimes, you know, you just drew a bunch of cards off your Mystic or Mystic Remora, and now you want to cast this Harnfell, and now that's just a win. It's basically a Nas on its own. And that's things that we're seeing more and more of, kind of at the cutting edge of like Grixis deck development, in my opinion. And as we spend more time looking into the card, I think we're going to see it grow in power level. So it gets an honorable mention for me. Not top 5, but maybe one day it will be. We'll see.
You know, yeah, I don't think people would begrudge you for putting Bergie onto a top 5. Granted, the top 5 cards for red are very strong Magic the Gathering cards. Very strong Magic the Gathering cards. But Bergie, like you said, more and more people are figuring out decks to put her in where she's very useful every single day. I would never complain about putting Bergie into my red deck. You know, as a occasional Prosper player, Bergie, probably the best card in my entire 99.
Good in that deck, I imagine.
Real good in that deck. It's usually actually how you win the game. Harnfell plus top, you win the game.
Yeah, there you go.
So easy peasy. But all right, Drake, what's up next for our honorable mentions?
Next up is card that kind of has the same kind of development going on, but in a very different angle. I want to talk about Final Fortune. And this is a card that, you know, certainly has seen play for a long time, you know, but it's not something that when you say, what are the red staples, people may include the card, might not, you know, not as much, like certainly maybe even less than Rite of Flame or whatever, which isn't even in my honorable mentions. I think that card is fine, not great.
It's
whatever.
It's a card you play because it's good,
right?
But it's not, not super excited about playing Rite of Flame.
Like, has a much higher value over replacement than something like Rite of Flame. You know, there's a bunch of things that make mana in cEDH. There's not too many 2-mana instant speed time walks. And the instant speed,
I was about to say, not too many time walks in cEDH, sure. Notably time walk being banned. So
yeah. Time walk itself out of here. You know, most of the blue ones 5 mana. You do of course have like Warrior's Oath Last Chance, but the instant versus sorcery matters a ton, you know, big for time. Stealing the turn order and then, you know, really punching the hole after a big fight happens and disrupting the natural turn order flow that people are expecting. So Final Fortune's a card that previously kind of had some heuristics around it as far as really only being good with like Necropotence, like the whole joke where you put a Necropotence in play, draw a million cards or whatever, Final Fortune, and then it's rolled up.
Really hope you could win.
Yeah. And Nas kind of the same thing where you can Nas a bunch, then you only need to make 2 mana, and then it's like a ritual because you get all your lands untapped again, and you know, whatever. It's pretty rolled up from there as well. But there's been more and more applications for Final Fortune, including just being additional counterspell resilience, because you can do things like lead your turn off for the Final Fortune and then attempt some kind of win. Let's say Thassa's Oracle, you know, Demonic Consultation. Well, that goes horribly, you know, whatever. That gets countered, and now you've used all your mana, you've fought with all your stuff, but you can just pass the turn to yourself, untap all your mana again, and then whatever, Mnemonic Betrayal or whatever.
Do something else,
Yeah, so it functions as kind of a bait spell as far as really taxing the table's interaction on your turn by giving yourself 2 goes at it. And as those applications have become more and more impressive because the wins get more efficient, you're putting more wins in your deck. And this I see most often with Rog Silas, which has the full set, you know, all 3 of the time walk effects. So they really, really lean hard into that interaction. The more impressed I am with it. And I've, you know, included it in my Blue Farm deck, my Najeela deck, like all my decks are just looking for generically good cards. Having one of Final Fortune to be able to tutor for, or, you know, even just pick up as part of your card advantage game plan, really impressive. So I think that card is still having a lot of development done for it as well. And it's been impressing me. And we may not even understand the full grasp of how strong it actually is in the format yet.
Yeah, Drake, you really emphasized like the development of the proliferation of this card in recent times. And I think in the year of like late 2022, early 2023, I think everybody finally figuring out that, like, yeah, we should be playing Final Fortune, and yeah, we should probably be playing one of or both of, like, Last Chance and Warrior's Oath, which are, like Drake alluded to, it's just you take an extra turn after this one. At the end of that turn, you lose the game, but instead it's a sorcery instead of an instant.
Yeah.
These three cards kind of finally making their way into more and more decks, I think, has been a really heads up moment by a lot of people working on decks. Like you said, Time Walk is really good, but I think for the longest time it was held down in people's mind by, that very scary last line of text. At the end of that turn, you lose the game. That's scary. I think that's the same kind of people being afraid of that, afraid of what their cards can do to them, is something that does plague a card that is on our top 5, but we'll get to that later. But yes, I have loved seeing more and more Final Fortune around. This card has been gas in every deck that I've put it in. I have been nothing but impressed with Final Fortune, and to a somewhat lesser extent, Warrior's Oath and Last Chance. I think it's hard to not group them all together, even though Instant and Sorcery are
Final Fortune
pretty
certainly
big.
A cut above.
Final Fortune definitely a cut above, but they bring the same effects to a deck often. I have loved seeing all of those cards in decks more and more, and I have loved casting them. So I think that's a great honorable mention.
Yeah, and like I said, it goes with Bergie as far as like the two cards in the honorable mentions that like I think have top 5 potential, but we're just not there yet. We don't really understand the full joke of these cards. Like they're not as prescriptive, and when you read them, you're like, okay, there's a lot going on here. And even something as simple as Final Fortune, it's like, all right, I lose the game, don't want to do that, so I need to figure out how to win. What times does the extra turn matter? And it turns out the answer is quite a bit.
Yeah, we do say, oh, ha, 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 red Time Walk, but you do have to do a lot more thinking about firing off a Final Fortune compared to a Time Walk.
Extremely true. Yeah. It's certainly not just Time Walk, but a lot of times it plays out that way because Time Walk, a good percentage of the time, if it were legal in cEDH, would just be, 2 mana, you win the game on your next turn kind of thing. It would play out the exact same way. And that's where the power really, really comes from. So the third honorable mention, this is the last one. This is the only card I think I would hear an argument for it should just be in our top 5 today, because we kind of understand this card's powerful. Maybe we don't give it the respect it deserves, but we understand this card's powerful, and it is, I think, one of the biggest reasons to play red, and actually is going to be one of the biggest reasons to play green, because you get another one. And of course, I'm talking about Simeon's Spirit Guide. So this is a card for the longest time enabled just broken stuff in Modern over and over and over again, eventually caught a ban. And that's kind of where I gained a lot of respect for Simeon's Spirit Guide and how somewhat innocuous it is, because it feels like a big cost. It's like, oh, this is a whole card, in my hand just for, what is essentially a Lotus Petal. But there's a lot going on with it beyond that, where it's, uncounterable. You can use it, from hand to surprise at instant speed and kind of do like the Force of Will thing with like pitch your Simeon Spirit Guide, Red Blast, that kind of stuff. It has a lot of applications, and, being something that doesn't require you to cast a spell comes up, and just having that card to add to the mix to enable like just truly a broken amount of fast mana is worth so much. But when it's kind of dwarfed by things like Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, and, the really, really, really busted mana, I think people lose some respect.
It pales in comparison if you're just only looking in the context of the busted stuff we do get to play.
Right. And so when you're looking at your artifacts, like, okay, well, this is kind of worse than Lotus Petal. This is definitely worse than Mana Crypt and Soul Ring. But as far as, when you're talking about the top 5 red cards, this thing's still really powerful. If you were to ban off like Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, like a bunch of this artifact mana, what would be left over would be everybody reaching for Simeon Spirit Guides, Elvish Spirit Guides, and that kind of stuff, and just trying to make all that fast mana still work with whatever's left over. And that's really where it would start to shine for how powerful it really is. But for now, it's good, it's strong, but I think people don't really visualize it because when they're thinking about mana, they're thinking about the more powerful effects than just Simeon Spirit Guide.
Yeah, I don't think I have much more to say about Simeon Spirit Guide than what you just did, Drake. The card's it's just a good card. Having mana is strong. Having unexpected mana is strong. Being able to rituals are strong, and it's kind of just like a little ritual that you don't have to pay any mana for. But before we move on to our top 5, I had one more card written down in the honorable mention type of category.
Right.
That I wanted to maybe pick your brain on a little bit, Drake. I don't know. I know some people think different things about this card. That's Jeska's Will. notable red card. If you have a commander, you can do both of these modes, add red for each card in a target opponent's hand, or exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. Maybe it's an honorable mention. Maybe it shouldn't be, but I've always enjoyed Jessica's Will. It seems it's a very powerful card because it feels like one of those strange role player cards that really just does get better the better your cards are. Where if you're playing a bad deck with an expensive commander, okay, you're only getting one of these modes. Maybe you don't have as impactful spells to cast with your red mana. Maybe you're exiling top 3 cards of your library and you hit 3 stone cold nothing. But, the stronger your deck is, the more accessible your commander is so that you can get both modes on this card. The more you can do with all that red mana that you get off of this 3 CMC spell. A lot of times you'll get 4, 5, 6, 7 red mana, maybe even off of a Jessica's Will. And then exiling top 3 cards of your library, the better your cards are, the better that will be for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pseudo draw 3, kind of not really, but I've always enjoyed Jessica's Will. I think it's one of those cards, I guess, that does have a really low floor, but also has a really high ceiling, where all the other cards we've talked about today so far do have pretty much high ceilings as a rule. So
yeah, I think it's a great honorable mention for that reason, right? Because the card is just scales really well as far as what you're doing with it. So let's talk about a deck like Krakashima or like Bergi. A big fan of Bergi myself. Jessica's Will looks incredible because it's everything you want to do. You want to make a pile of red mana, you want to exile a bunch of cards, and sometimes, it's a great card to just do over and over again. Like probably, this is a cEDH podcast, probably the best card in Oathbreaker as far as signature spells go, because guess what? You can do it, and then it makes the mana to just do it again. So now suddenly
like 2 or 3 more times. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you just have like a draw 9, draw 12, or whatever, whatever the hand composition looks like. And I mean, certainly something I'm spending a lot of time exploring in Oathbreaker. That's what I want to be doing. But and you get that same kind of thing with a deck like Krakashima, where it's like, all right, copy it, bounce it. Oh, guess what? We're doing it again because it makes the mana for itself.
Okay, we've gone +3 red mana, and we're exiling 3 more cards.
We can keep doing this. So it gets better the more of it you can do. And so it does kind of ask your deck to do a lot of that kind of thing, make mana, exile the cards from the top. Like you want it to be, like you said, one of the best role players in a mix of that kind of stuff that's the same, which is kind of where Berkey falls. It's like, yeah, I'd love to make a bunch of red mana and get access to a bunch more cards that either make red mana or find more cards. Yes, great. Jessica's Will, awesome. And combos well with if you just have Berkey in your 99 and you are like, all right, play Jessica's Will, make some stuff, make some red mana, play Harnfell. All right, now guess what? Now we're cooking. We got stuff to work with. And those 2 cards just play really, really well together. But Jessica's Will, like you mentioned, does fall off pretty hard if you don't have great ways to use the red mana. So this is where it falls off as far as just being generically good. You don't really want to reach for it in some of the Grixis decks because, it's not necessarily guaranteed you're going to be able to use the red mana. If you can, it's broken. It's just insane. It's better Seething Song. It's everything you could ever want. It's great. And the card is certainly strong. But as far as low floors, people don't have cards in the hand. It only makes 2 mana. You hit land, whatever. Like the card can brick, which is not necessarily true as much for some of the other cards we'll talk about. Now, the nature of red, that's kind of how their cards are. Their cards generally
we're
are
just going
to
brick sometimes.
Yeah.
You might lose the game. You might discard the card you tutored for.
You got to
we're flying by the seat of our pants.
And that's part of my fascination with the red cards is they are really strong at their ceiling, but some of them have really low floors, like you mentioned. Losing the game, looking at a bunch of lands, and then you're not doing anything anymore, and you had a combo turn set up. Like that kind of stuff is very much what red has going on for it. But there are cards that whiff or need less going on in order to succeed. So Jessica's Will, in my opinion, great honorable mention, but I do think it certainly falls outside of our top 5 that we have to work with.
Yeah, I think of all the cards we talked about, I think that the 3 honorable mentions that you brought up, I think you could make arguments for all of them to be like number 5 on the top 5 or what have you. But Jessica's Will, it feels like we kind of have to talk about it because it has such potential, but the floor is also so low that it's just like, 6A, 6B.
Yeah. Well, if we're making a top 10, I think we've fleshed out most of a top 10 at this point.
Yep,
and,
exactly.
Those slots that pass 5, probably whatever. You can mix them around and do what you will with those. But in general, they're not really going to break the top 5 yet. But, of course, subject to change as more cards enter the format.
All right, now that we've practically made a top 10, it's time for us to move on to ostensibly the topic of this podcast, which is the best 5 Reds EDH cards that we have today in 2023. And coming in at what I put at number 5, that is Wheel of Fortune. 2 generic, a red, sorcery. Everybody discards their hand and draws 7 new cards. Drake, what can you tell me about this reserve-less masterpiece?
A masterpiece it is. This card held a lot of fascination to me because growing up, I understood the Power 9 to include the card Time Twister, but in every single experience I had, like even as like a casual or whatever, Wheel of Fortune seemed like a way better card to me than Time Twister, so I just didn't understand, like for a long time, what makes Time Twister so much better than Wheel of Fortune, because Wheel of Fortune looks like a way better card to me. Why isn't this on the Power 9? And the answer is it's just not blue. That's the entire joke, is that Time Twister's blue and Wheel of Fortune's not, because Wheel of Fortune is a better card. Now, it has some extra risk.
Drake saying that Wheel of Fortune goes into the Power 9 over Time Twister?
Sure. I think the better argument is actually Time Twister just doesn't belong in the Power 9. But whatever. We're here. This is the Power 9 we have to work with. Whatever. Mana Crypt probably should be. What are we doing? Anyways, we can rebuild the Power 9 in a different podcast episode. But for the time being, Wheel of Fortune, extremely strong. And I think Wheels have shown their flexibility and their pedigree in cEDH time and time again. And the range on Wheels, I think, is actually one of the biggest disconnects that players entering cEDH have when they enter the format. They're like, okay, what am I supposed to do with Wheels? Well, what I do with Vintage Cube is I dump on my hand and then I wheel and I refill and then I keep going. And that's what I do with Wheels. And so that's naturally the things they lean towards in this format. But that usage, I have found, is good, but not as good as other things you could be doing. You know, you could be nosing, you could be breaching, all this stuff on turn 1. So it's not that strong. Where Wheels really begin to shine for me is disrupting players that have drawn a disproportionate amount of cards. You know, somebody just fed Aristic 20 cards, so now they have 20 cards, everybody else doesn't have anything. Or somebody's played a Necro and paid 15, and now their hand is just the exact 7 cards they'd want. And how do you disrupt that? It's difficult to do, but Wheels are efficient, an efficient way to do it that don't punish you because you get refilled as well. Also refill the rest of the table, so when you pass the turn after wheeling, you know, you're not necessarily likely to die because guess what? Player 4 has a hand of 7 new cards that they can use to interact. So it keeps that parity at the table as long as people have the necessary interaction to stay alive through a bunch of things. You know, if you're looking at a no blue table, Wheels certainly incur some risk, but Wheel of Fortune is kind of the best of the bunch. It combos with Underworld Breach, a card you might see a little bit later in the show as well.
Spoilers.
Being able to do the combo itself with LED Wheel of Fortune comes up, does matter. And beyond that, you have Notion Thief combos. You know, so not only does it have that flexibility to be this powerful turn 1 play to refill your hand, not only does it have the power to disrupt people that have just gotten really far ahead with card advantage, but maybe are a little bit low on, you know, mana resources or what have you to interact with you. But also, it can be a combo piece. It can be a combo piece with your Notion Thieves. It can be a combo piece with your Narsets. It can be a combo piece with your Underworld Breach. It just works well with everything you want to be doing in cEDH. And that range on Wheels can't be understated. It's so strong. And when you're playing a red deck, you have to have some really, really good reasons not to put a Wheel of Fortune in your deck. Because, what are you doing? Like, even, like I said, Goto. I don't know if Goto plays a Wheel of Fortune because they're just trying to make a bunch of mana, but I'm pretty sure they're supposed to. So, card strong.
Yeah, I think the wheels in general are, you know, the card type wheels, the archetype of wheels is something that the cEDH community likes to talk about a lot. Kind of like Final Fortune, kind of like Gamble, which, spoiler, we're also going to be talking about. You know, wheels can be kind of scary because you have to often give up things that you have in your hand. Like, oh, I really actually want this X card in my hand if I want to snap off this wheel, which can be a hard decision for people to overcome in their mind. And then you have to look at a blank 7, assuming you haven't messed with the top of your library at any point in time, which can, again, be kind of another scary experience, if you want to call it that, because, yeah, you could rip the gas or you could rip junk, you know.
True.
But and then of course, while you yourself are drawing 7 cards, your opponents are drawing a combined 21 cards, which is, again, not exactly the best card advantage situation for you. You know, 3 for 1ing yourself, you could say. But the effect is just so outrageously powerful that it's just so hard to overlook. Like all those things that you said, you can feel your breach. There is the mode of, oh yeah, I mulled to 5 and I dumped my mana rocks and now I'm going to have 7 cards in hand. Ooh, how exciting. Yeah, you can take people off of what they've been doing, whether it be drawing a lot of cards from heuristic studies, sculpting their hand through tutors, going big off in Necro, et cetera, et cetera. It's great for all of those things. And at the end of the day, I know your opponent's drawn 21 cards is scary, but I think an important dynamic that's also often really lost in a lot of cEDH games is, yeah, your opponent is drawn a lot of cards, and that can help you out a lot. We've said it time and again on this podcast, especially Ryan, but like in between different phases, as we move throughout the game, even phase to phase, turn to turn, turn cycle to turn cycle, who is like your enemy and who is your ally can just like shift instantly. And so, yeah, a guy who is looking pretty strong drawing 7 cards might be a little scary to you, but if it draws him into the interaction that you're missing, that will stop another player from winning, hey, great. That worked well for you. And if we're looking to get any of these kind of effects that I alluded to or that Drake alluded to, Wheel of Fortune is about the best you can get. Unless you're really just trying to interact with somebody else's a big graveyard, Time Twister will help you out with that one. But when it comes to all of these different wheels, Wheel of Fortune is pretty much the best of the best. And it's just a great red card.
Absolutely. And I really like the call out there because wheels get worse the earlier you cast them and pass the turn, in my opinion. So, for instance, if you just like turn 1 Wheel of Fortune specifically or whatever, and you don't really have anything going on, nobody has any mana or whatever, it opens up actually other players to just be able to play Breach or just play like Mnemonic Betrayal and win on the spot. Where wheels get a lot of interest for me in this format is they actually get a lot better as time goes on because the graveyards are already stocked, so that risk is already there. If you Wheel of Fortune and somebody has Demonic Tutor to go grab Mnemonic Betrayal, whatever, that's something they were going to have anyway. All the players have their mana, and so it doesn't really matter as much as it does if you just do it on turn 1 and now, somebody that couldn't win before now is just like, okay, Demonic Tutor Breach, I win. That's passing the turn after wheeling early in the game is really, really tough unless you're just strapped with interaction or something. But as the game goes on, wheels actually get better. And that's very counterintuitive to players, like me, that come from 1v1 formats where really, if you are Wheel of Fortuning, you really just want to be blowing the doors off
early and often.
Yeah. You need to be just killing your opponent because giving them all these cards, this card advantage, isn't good. Now they have more things to interact with you or whatever. But with the tension of cEDH, and I could talk about that in its own podcast where people, you need your opponents to play the game because you can't win by yourself most games of cEDH. You need to have allies on your team interacting and stopping the win, even if it's, temporary allyship or whatever. Wheels really enable a lot of that, and they're great politic points. They're very, very powerful. They can be used, like we mentioned, to just win the game on their own, but they're also used wrong. They can kill you. And that's a really frustrating experience. What am I doing? I just played this thing, drew my opponent's cards, and they killed me. And so you can feel really, really silly casting your wheels, but used correctly, I think they're incredibly strong. And like I said, you'd have to make a very, very strong argument to get Wheel of Fortune out of the top 5 for me. Cards strong, wheels are great. Not much more to say beyond that, but they're really, really good.
All right, we've made it through our honorable mentions and the 5th card, and that means it's time for an ad break. So we'll be right back. Thanks for listening.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Card Conduit. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value of my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best buy list price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would have from a major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list price against the specific condition of a card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the show notes or the description, or use the promo code POWER, you'll also get 10% off their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's podcast.
And welcome back to the Playing with Power podcast. Drake and I are still here trying to get through our top 5 red cards, but luckily we have so much to say that we're only to number 5. So let's keep it moving and get right into number 4. And that is deflecting SWAT. I think there's a phrase out there when it comes to Magic the Gathering cards that goes to something like, if it's free, it's for me. And that's how I feel about deflecting SWAT for sure. 3 CMC, technically. Red instant. If you control your commander, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. And then it lets you reset the target on pretty much any spell. So deflecting SWAT can be a counterspell by redirecting another counterspell. Deflecting SWAT can be protection from one of your permanents or even one of your opponent's permanents if somebody is trying to remove it in the wrong scenario for you. Deflecting SWAT, I think a lot of people, this card was first revealed, a lot of people looked at deflecting SWAT and they're like, well, I've never really wanted like a redirect effect before. Like, that's like fine. I guess we used to play misdirection once upon a time. But, is that really all that great? But the answer is yes.
Yeah, it is.
Because, it can be it's effectively a free counterspell for many decks. It's free protection for your commander or your best permanents. I don't know what else I could say about deflecting SWAT beyond, it's much like Jessica's Will. Like we mentioned earlier, it is one of those spells that gets better the easier you can cast it for free. Those 3 CMC Jeweled Lotus commanders like Najeela, Malcolm, if you can cast your commander on turn 1 like that, it's great. It's a big reason why a lot of times you'll see Rograk decks, the first game action they take every game is cast their Rograk before they even play a land, because then immediately they're deflecting SWAT and other cards from that cycle are just turned on immediately. So the better your commander is, the better deflecting SWAT's going to be for you. But even if you have an expensive commander and happen to have it in play, deflecting SWAT's going to do a lot of work every time.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything you just said. And I really like you touching on misdirection as a comparison point, because it's a card that you don't see people play too much. And so it's like, okay, well, these cards are really close. If you want deflecting SWAT and, your whole joke is that it's free, it's for me. Well, what's up with misdirection? It's free. It should be for you. Why isn't it your deck? And the answer is, I don't really know. The bar on a misdirection effect is apparently that slim, like where the jump from, okay, pitching a blue card and it's free to deflecting SWAT, being just free if you have your commander, is the bridge that you wanted, even though cards like Force of Will, Force Negation see play. It's interesting. But I think the phrase I hear the most with deflecting SWAT is a lot of people being like, all right, I can't stop this win, but if you have something, I can back you up. And that's like the, hey, I have deflecting SWAT words that people say. It's like, you could just say you have deflecting SWAT at that point. Like, what does this mean? Like, maybe it means Mind Break Trap.
Counter this creature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So deflecting SWAT is extremely strong. I think we've seen that time and time again. Fierce Guardianship, obviously the stronger card because blue just gets the best toys all the time. But there are times
every single time
where SWAT is better. We see referencing the finals of Punt City 2. Somebody put Peer into the Abyss on the stack. Guess what's better against that one? That'll be deflecting SWAT.
Deflecting SWAT, yeah. So, I'll have that target me.
I'll take that. Thanks. That one's for me, and it is free. Yep. So it is free and for me. Thank you.
I'll take a free Peer into the Abyss. Thank you.
Exactly. So deflecting SWAT has these like really corner cases where it's way, way better, but the base rate, like you mentioned, you do the misdirection trick where it's like, oh, going for a win. Oh, counter that. Okay, here's my SWAT. Target your counterspell. On resolution, redirect your counterspell to my SWAT, because that's how that works. All right, my SWAT's in the graveyard now, and your counterspell's targeting something that's illegal. Great job. I win. And that's just good enough. Great one-card protection, good for a lot of win attempts. And I think that's kind of where you see misdirection be a little bit worse, is defending your own win. Needing that extra blue card is like a big cost when you're defending your own stuff, whereas just having it be one card actually matters a lot when you're defending your win, because the other cards in your hand don't need to, you can use them to do the win. So the line small, but as far as red cards go, I mean, a deck that doesn't include blue is so happy to do anything as far as interacting on the stack. So deflecting SWAT, a home run if you're not even touching blue. But in your blue decks that have a host of other options, I mean, most of them include it too, if your commander costs less than like 5 or whatever.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that what I have noticed with misdirection versus deflecting SWAT, this isn't a card comparison podcast, but the more I've messed around with Forceful and Force of Negation, which are cards I'm never cutting from my cEDH deck, and as more and more blue cards incidental blue cards have gotten trimmed out of my lists, because we don't play the cantrips anymore or whatever. Exiling a blue card from your hand, pretty big costs. You're like, all right, I'll do this, but now I don't have an offer you can't refuse anymore if I need that, or whatever. So I'll take a free card over card disadvantage of my best cards any day, I think.
Absolutely. And not to change it too hard, but that is actually one of my biggest gripes about cEDH deck building. Like, even when I entered the format in like 2018 or whatever, is
gotta hit that blue card.
The average deck is so disrespectful to a Force of Will count. Like, for how many blue cards you need, which people have done the math for Legacy time and time again, people are just so disrespectful. It's like, how are you ever pitch casting this? You have a 5-mana cancel in your deck. But the real joke is that with things like Ad Nauseam and Ristic Study and all that stuff, you draw so many cards that like the math changes a little bit, and that's the actual joke. But so I've kind of gotten off that horse a little bit until somebody smarter than me does all the math for it. But it is wild just how few blue cards people put in their deck. And they're like, yeah, I'm a Force Will deck. So SWAT, certainly not taxing your blue cards like Misdirection would.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's number 4. That's deflecting SWAT. Now we're going to move on to number 3, perhaps one of the most maligned or one of the most joked about incredible red cards. That is Gamble. Red sorcery, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and then discard a card from your hand at random. Once again, really driving home one of the themes of this episode is that red cards are scary, but if you can get over that hump, they will greatly reward you. None of the other 1 CMC tutors put a card into your hand. They all put that stuff onto the top of your library. But you have a 30, 40, 60, 10% chance of discarding that card that you worked so hard. You cast a tutor spell and 1 red mana to go and get this card, and you might have to discard it instead of winning the game. That's just horrifying. How do you get over that? How do you live with that, Drake?
Pretty easily. I don't have any trouble with this one. Now, I guess it is very aptly named, and that there are players out there that are like, oh, the one time they like discard the card, they're just like head in hands, like traumatic moment, going through some montage to never play that again.
It's tough. Like, I lost a game at Punt City 2 because my entire game plan was turn 1, gamble for Mana Crypt, and smooth sail from there. And what do you know? I had 6 cards in hand and discarded a Mana Crypt.
Gone. See you later. Yeah, I mean, it happens. But like, there used to be a player when I was playing in 1v1 tournaments that with respect to 1v1 Magic, they would be like, all right, if I can get the game to a state where all I need to do is top deck a land at like a 50% rate, all I need to do is top deck a land to win, I will take that every time. And they use that as a heuristic as far as keeping hands and, navigating game states. That was like their heuristic. I have some gripes with that, but that kind of general principle applies here, where it's like, all right, if you are looking at a hand that needs your gamble to hit to win, and you're like, all right, well, what's my chances? Well, I'll have 2 cards. That's a 50-50. I'll have, 3. It's a 33% chance of losing. And it goes down from there. I think you're pretty happy with that, because to start the game off, like, all else equal, whatever, people qualify this like 25% win rate. I think it's kind of nonsense, but whatever. If you're accepting the ideology that you're only 25% to win any game from any seat, just to simplify the mathematics, and you're looking at your gamble, and you're 50% to win the game if this goes your way. Well, that's higher than 25. So, we're already doing great. And it goes, you go down from there. Now you're 66% to win. Now you're 75% to win if it goes your way. And as the math increases, it's just kind of a no-brainer. And that kind of heuristics, I mean, it's a lot of math simplification that happens there, but that's kind of how I've justified it to myself, is like, yeah, this card just is going to work as just red demonic tutor, discard some other random card more often than not. And that is more than good enough to justify its inclusion, especially if you're talking about red decks that don't play black and you don't have access to demonic tutor, vampiric tutor, imperial seal, the suite of tutors that just work and do the thing every single time. It's at a premium. I mean, a deck like Bergie, I'd play 10 gambles if I could. Like, card is so powerful, and one of the only ways to tutor in the color red. And not only that, it's actually just like one of the better tutors. Like, I would play gamble, I think, before vampiric tutor in the average deck. That might be controversial to some people, but just being able to have the card immediately go off immediately. The gamble for Underworld Breach is a very common play pattern right there. It's one red, basically win the game, because then you can go gamble for your LED, whatever, what have you. And that's just extremely strong, and it sets everything up that you want to set up. Filling your graveyard isn't even a downside if you're talking about something like Underworld Breach. It just does everything you want, and it enables some of the most broken turn ones you can have. And overall, it gets overshadowed by, I think, both number 1 and 2 on our list. But the card Gamble is a lot closer to those cards than people give it credit for. It's a card that people are going to play basically always. Like, I don't think there's going to be a time in cEDH where decks that are red don't put Gamble in their deck anymore. I don't know what the configuration looks like. Maybe some weird stacks decks don't play it, but even that seems kind of wrong to me, because being able to just go search your best stacks piece, whatever, seems great.
Maybe like Krokushima doesn't want a chance discarding 3 random cards. I don't know. I doubt it, though.
I mean, you get cards back. I don't know. That seems fine to me.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I imagine Gamble's going to be in basically every red deck. And once again, kind of that's the joke here with our entire top 5 is, if it's not in your deck, you got to have a real good reason why, because this card is just so strong that we're not talking about justifying its inclusion. We're about justifying its exclusion from your deck if you're in the color red at all. And Gamble certainly fits that bill.
Yep, exactly. If you have been on the fence about Gamble, or if you have been harmed by Gamble in the past, like so many of us are, I encourage you, put that back into your deck. This tutor will serve you very well, except for the 8% of the time when it doesn't.
Except when it doesn't. It works except when it doesn't. Great card. Put it in your deck.
Hey, I'm telling you, that's been the theme of this entire episode. All these red cards, man, they're great except for when they're not.
Great except when they're not. So yeah, red's awesome. Red's really broken in cEDH. Yeah. I love it.
All right. 5 through 3 is down. These top 2, before we started recording, we kind of reordered these a little bit. I said one way, you said the other, but I think realistically, this is more like 1A and 1B more than anything else. These 2 red cards kind of stand head and shoulders above the rest of these cards, maybe. And they even stand head and shoulders above many of the other best cards of the other colors that you could put onto top 5 lists for other colors and whatnot. And we'll do that eventually. Don't worry. But I'm going to go with what we ended up at number 2, what I put on the show notes as number 2. And that is Underworld Breach. If you've been playing cEDH at all since the release of Theros Beyond Death, or maybe if you've been playing Modern recently, or played Legacy for 2 weeks back in early 2020, then you are very aware of the card Underworld Breach. I don't know how long it took to get banned in Legacy. I assume it was 2 weeks.
I think it's the record. I think it was 4 or 5 weeks. I did but have a tournament yes. I played with that Legacy deck, and yeah, it was just not close. It was comical, actually. Just how much you just rolled over every other Legacy deck. It was just not close at all. Yeah.
Nope. Okay, I haven't said the name of the card yet, I guess. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you did. You said Underworld Breach. We got
I said Underworld Breach. But yes, they printed a 2 CMC red, better Yawgmoth's Will, I guess, is where we ended up here. Better, different. People could say it different ways. But yes, Underworld Breach enters the battlefield. your cards in your graveyard have escape 3 until the end of the turn, which is you can recast it for its mana cost if you just exile 3 other cards from your graveyard.
So expensive. And how would you have the cards
exactly.
for that?
I know. Maybe it should just say escape 4 on it. That would make a meaningful difference, right?
Yeah.
But this card, and you have to sacrifice it in the turn. So if you do get stopped, you might not be able to use it again.
Just the graveyard once you're done with it.
Yeah. It's crazy.
I don't know how many times you've put that line of text on the stack, but I think I'm sub 5 lifetime, and I've cast a lot of lifetime breaches.
Exactly. So notably, escape, unlike Yawgmoth's Will or many other effects that allow you to recast cards from the graveyard, a card you've escaped, if it dies or resolves or what have you, it doesn't get exiled. It just goes right back to your graveyard and you can cast it with Underworld Breach again. And so this is, of course, what causes the game-winning loop that so many Magic the Gathering decks like to utilize in cEDH, which is make a ton of mana off of your Lion's Eye Diamond, refill your graveyard over and over again with Brain Freeze, and then, you can flash back Thassa's Oracle, or you could just keep recasting Brain Freeze with a huge storm count to mill out your opponents, which is like a little bit less safe, quote unquote, in case they have a shuffle effect or can endurance themselves, or whatever. They can blow you out through some very niche ways. But Underworld Breach, even if you needed to, if you're in the middle of a really long game and you're not winning the game off an Underworld Breach, it can do a pretty okay regrowth impression. So Underworld Breach, it wins the game. It's really strong. It's not even close to many other cards how strong it is. I put it at number 2. Maybe Drake would have put it at number 1.
It's probably number 1 for me. This is the card, in my opinion, that kind of invalidates all the nonsense like ban Thassa's Oracle discussion. Because people are like, oh, Thassa's Oracle, so ubiquitous, so easy, blah, 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 ban it. And it's like, okay, look, like Thassa's Oracle is not even in the zip code of Underworld Breach. It's just not even in the same zip code. Like, Underworld Breach just wins if you're just playing Magic the Gathering. You don't need a second piece. There's no second piece. People are like, oh, it's 3 cards. You need Brain Freeze and Elite. No, you don't. No, you don't. You don't need any of that. You need Underworld Breach, and you need just something. You need Magic cards. Put a Demonic Tutor in your deck. Oh, wow, I win the game. Look at that. That was weird. And it's like, put a whatever. Put a Gamble. Put a anything. I don't know. Lotus Petal. It just doesn't matter. Wheel of Fortune. Sure, why not? Cards I want to play anyway? Yeah, sure. It just wins the game. Underworld Breach is just the card for me in modern design where I was like, what are we doing anymore?
What is the upside of this?
Where's the joke? Like, normally, for the longest time, I've been playing Magic a long time. During preview season, you look at cards and you're like, wow, this looks so broken, and it never is. Like, I was there for Aurelius Fury. I was there for $50 Aurelius Fury. It's like, this card's going to break everything. Like, Silence, holy cow, and you tap the creatures and just, wow. And people just thought this card was bananas. And it's just not. And, like, there was a bunch of those. I mean, Aurelius Fury was what it was. There was a bunch of those, and it turns out, the best card in the sets, whatever, who cares? Obsidat or whatever nonsense. But
a Shockland reprint.
Yeah, exactly. Tasker the Golden Fang was $2 at pre-release. Oh wait, this card's just the best threat we have now. Yeah, all that kind of stuff happened. Where like the best cards in the set were kind of hidden, and like the big splashy stuff everyone got excited for, like, wow, this is broken, was just like not good,
not great.
And like Underworld Breach was the first card where on release everyone's like, wait.
They just made it easy.
Wait, this is better than Yawgmoth's Will, right? Everyone's like looking at each other like, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is better than Yawgmoth's Will. And it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not, and it's hidden. No, it's just better than Yawgmoth's Will. Like, it's just, this card is banned everywhere. Yawgmoth's Will is just broken, banned in everything. It's like, oh, here's a better one. There you go. 2 mana. Set 3. And yeah, anyways. What? Like, why? Huh? It's just, the card's been, nobody, I think, missed the boat on this one. This card, when it was spoiled, like, hello, this is not okay, right? Yeah, that's not okay. Banned in Legacy instantly, whatever. Just tearing up Modern right now. Banned in Pioneer. Like, you can't really play the card very many formats. I'm not confident you're supposed to be allowed to play the card in this format, but you're certainly not banning Thassa's Oracle before you ban this card that's in the same set. It is better at winning the game. Like, you're just not doing that. So, yeah, Underworld Breach to me, I like it a lot because I think it makes the combo turns very interesting. There's a lot of moving parts. I like, game action, storm deck, stuff like that. That is very appealing to me, but I sympathize a lot with the other cEDH players that liked when winning the game was harder. I mean, I think there's less interaction, all this kind of stuff. You can argue about what you want cEDH to be ad nauseum. No pun intended. But Underworld Breach to me does a lot of what I want. And honestly, I wouldn't care If they ban Thassa's Oracle, I don't think they should, but I wouldn't really care that much because it's like, okay, well, you didn't ban the best way to win the game in CEDH. And really, in my opinion, the reason we see a lot more red. I mean, we could talk about our number one. I think that segues really well into our number one. But in my opinion, what makes Underworld Breach kind of my number one is it is the reason to play red. If you're playing, like if you are building a CEDH deck, and okay, well, how do I build a powerful CEDH deck? Well, I need winning the game to be, easy, quick, that kind of stuff. Underworld Breach is just the best thing to be doing. And, that isn't necessarily true for certainly any of the other cards on this list. They help contribute. Wheel of Fortune, good early, that kind of stuff. Gamble, same deal. But Underworld Breach, so unique in what it does and how easy it makes winning the game. Even though you compare it to Yawgmoth's Will, it's so much better. They're just way easier to win. And it's just a card that's on people's radar constantly. You put it on the stack, that last line of text where it's getting sacrificed is not coming up. Somebody's about to win the game, so something needs to happen here. Silence or whatever needs to resolve. Underworld Breach. Can't say enough. If you play enough CEDH at all, you understand this card is just not okay. You can argue with me and us about exactly how not okay it is, but I think if you've played any CEDH in the last, 2-3 years, you understand. Underworld Breach.
You have it figured out. Yeah, exactly. Good card. Well, maybe I should have put that number one on my list, but here's number one on my list and probably number two on Drake's list, I would assume. Yeah. And that is Dockside Extortionist. Talking of cards, about cards that people have asked to be banned in this format, Dockside Extortionist, a generic red creature, goblin. Is it a goblin advisor? I don't even know.
I think it's a goblin pirate, isn't it?
Oh. Yeah, there's a pirate.
Right? Yeah, you play pirate. It attacks, yeah.
Goblin pirate. It makes me even more treasures. Enters the battlefield. It makes you X treasures, where X is the total number of artifacts and enchantments that your opponents control. Dockside Extortionist, definitely another CEDH card that really doesn't need any introduction, realistically. It's up here at 1, 2 for a reason. It's the best ritual in the format. Except it's like not even a traditional ritual where your mana immediately leaves you. You could just like use 2 of it and keep 4 of it for a rainy day, because it makes you treasures, and it operates off of how many artifacts mainly, but the enchantments also count, your opponents have. And in an average CEDH game, that count is going to be very high because everyone is trying to start with those soul rings. Often tutoring for those mana crypts. Plenty of other random artifacts lying around. They'll cast an arcade signet. More and more people are playing talismans. People tutor for Rhystic Study. Somebody will randomly have a Necropotence in play and haven't won the game yet. Go figure. The Dockside counts are, there's rarely a world where Dockside Extortionist doesn't take you from 2 mana to 3 treasures. But the world usually is it takes you from 2 mana to 8 treasures. And that's just, that wins games of CEDH. I know it isn't quite like Underworld Breach where it's, you cast Underworld Breach and then you cast any spell in your deck and you can pretty much win. But Dockside Extortionist usually is like, you cast Dockside Extortionist and that gives you the mana you need to cast the other 3 cards in your hand, and then you win the game.
Exactly.
I put it at number one.
I think it's pretty trivial. I mean, both Underworld Breach and Dockside kind of have similar things going on where their value over replacement is so high. Just having one Underworld Breach your deck to tutor for is so much better than 0. Same is true with Dockside Extortionist. Oh, wow, there's 12 artifacts in play. Let me just tutor this Dockside up, and now I went from whatever. I played 2 for my Demonic Tutor, 2 for my Dockside, 4 mana to 12 mana. All right, sure. And I think that's where a lot of other players kind of get their respect for Dockside, and frankly why I am more forgiving to ban arguments that go after things like Dockside, because the card is just so much better than anything else. You mentioned best ritual. Yeah, rituals are already things you want to put in your deck. I've played with Desperate Ritual plenty.
Like we said, we play Rite of Flame.
Yeah, we play Rite of Flame in this format. Oh, here's Dockside Extortionist. Oh yeah, for sure. Now, it
Rite of Flame into Dockside Extortionist. Oh!
Yeah, okay. It has some of the red stuff going on where, there's times where somebody just casts a color ritual and now, okay, it makes 1 mana or something. And there's going to be game states where it's not that good. That's going to be true for Underworld Breach too. All of this is kind of a theme through all the red cards. They do need other stuff to be going on. But in the case of both of these cards, the ask isn't that much. It's like, oh, are your opponents playing relevant cards? If so, Dockside's broken. Oh, did you play any relevant cards? If so, okay, Underworld Breach is broken. And those are kind of the asks. It's not tall. Dockside also has combo potential, just like Underworld Breach does, where it's like, oh, here, check out Emil. Oh, here, check out whatever, Corvold. You know, I'm just going to draw 12 or whatever and make mana. Cool. And like, Dockside Extortionist is just so much better and so much more unique that calling it a ritual is almost disingenuous because, like you said, the mana doesn't drain. It's just like, oh, here's this burst of mana. I'm going to use 3 of it to play Heuristic Study, and now I have 5 more mana that I can use to interact. Your turn. What does winning this game look like? You're not winning this game. And so it's just, I think the ability for Dockside to enable not just like some of the powerful Grixis stuff, which gets talked about a ton in cEDH, but it also enables like other decks to do weird stuff to like talk about Rocco, where it's like, okay, there's no ad nauseams being cast. You know, they're not really looking to Underworld Breach, but guess what? They're still just going to grab Dockside, do something broken with it. Like, it doesn't matter that much the rest of the context of your deck. Making a pile of mana is good in every deck. And if you're playing red, you should have Dockside in your deck. Like, in my opinion, there's no argument to it. Like, maybe you could make a case that it's like, oh, well, I'm a stack that plays a bunch of Rest in Peace effects for whatever reason. I'm not going to put Underworld Breach in my deck. You should still put Dockside in your deck. I don't care how many, whatever, Stony Silences you have, how many Null Rods you have. There's going to be games where what you're going to do is you're going to play Dockside, crack all the treasures, play a Stony Silence, and then play something else. Like, it's just good. Exactly. The comparison you used in 60 card formats for the longest time was decks that played Snapcaster Mage and Rest in Peace, where it's like, it's okay to have dyssynergy if, you know, the hammer, Rest in Peace, is so strong that you're okay casting it and having your Snapcasters not work. Or you just don't cast the Rest in Peace or whatever, or you don't bring it in if it's in your sideboard, and your Snapcaster is just a great card in your deck that does everything you want to do. It's very much that for Dockside Extortionist. Like, the card is so powerful that if you have your Stony Silence out, you're fine just looking at a Dockside. Hell, maybe your Stony Silence gets blown up at some point, then your Dockside works, you get to catch back up. Who cares? Like, if one of the others going on, they're both strong, and you probably should just be doing those. And that's going to be the case for Dockside Extortionist in even your red-based stacks decks too. It's so good. There's no excuse not to play it in your red deck. And that to me is a good argument for it being in the number 1 spot. Like, that is what I think Underworld Breach is more deserving of bans than Dockside is, but frankly, you could catch them both and I wouldn't be surprised. That's where I'm like, okay, people want to ban Thassa's Oracle. Like, the top 2 red cards are more bannable than Thassa's Oracle. Like, get out of here. Get out of here. Just take that argument somewhere else. It's nonsense. But I played cEDH prior to the existence of both of our top 2. Underworld Breach, Dockside Extortionist. And I played red. I played Brea. And at the time, Gamble was a clear number 1 for me. I was like, holy cow, this Gamble card messed up. Wheel of Fortune, probably the number 2 at the time. I don't think Deflecting Swat was out yet. But like, those are the 2 red cards. Like, Simian Spirit Guide kind of, like, I think was on the list. But for the most part, like, Wheel of Fortune and Gamble were like the best red cards by a lot. And so you oftentimes are asking yourself, like, why am I playing red? Like, I'm playing a really light splash of red. You know, things like Tim to Thrasios had a lot more appeal. Because, like, what am I losing? A tutor? I grab another one anyway out of white. And all that kind of stuff. That's a lot more interesting to me. Well, and then in the span of like 2 to 3 years, they printed, you know, the rest of this top 5, and red had this meteoric rise to power that I think a lot of the old heads talking about, like Tim to Thrasios and like how it's, you know, not dead or it's still worth playing. It's like, okay, well, there's some merit to that. I mean, it still was strong for a time and had a lot of deck development done on it. But I think more and more as the cEDH format is developing, you have to have some really, really good excuses not to play red. And the lion's share of the reasoning is these top 2 cards. Talking about Dockside, talking about Underworld Breach. And that is why if you're building a red deck and you're not including these cards, like, should you even be building a red deck? That is like, they're so powerful. Those are the questions you need to be asking yourself, because not including those cards is so much of a mistake that, you know, your deck has to just be doing something extremely powerful that is, you know, very, very unique in its dimension in order to not want both of these cards in conjunction with each other. And like we mentioned, things like Crom, Timna, seen a huge rise, Rogrek, Silas. None of these decks would have the power and the pedigree they do without these red cards. And it's really what has given the color strength and relevance in the cEDH format. And being there to watch it happen, I mean, red did not have the presence it did today at all through earlier years of cEDH. It was just like, I mean, I'm very partial to red, something I want to do anyway, but like, people were not putting red in their deck because you didn't have to. Now it's not necessarily clear that you don't have to, you know, it's that strong. There are non-red decks, whatever, you know, things like Tivit that operate on their own weird axis, that kind of stuff. But they're exceptions to the rule, not the rule. and Underworld Breach, Dockside Extortionist are just so format defining at this point that they are what you need to be looking at and talking about when you're talking about what you want your cEDH format to look like. Like, do you want it to be about Docksides and Underworld Breaches? If not, maybe you want to start reaching to ban those cards. If you do, which I personally do, I love cEDH. I'm having the most fun I've had in the format ever, today. And as we continue to develop, I think the cards are great for the format and, incentivize unique things. But both of them, in my opinion, like you mentioned, 1A, 1B, clearly undisputed best 2 red cards, and so strong that they've become format defining and have pushed red to like clearly the best third color above, white and green, where that was definitely not the obvious case beforehand.
Yep, exactly, Drake. And that's all we have for our top 5 red cards for cEDH in the year of 2023. We can say that, but I don't know if this list is changing anytime soon. These cards are all really good, and it would take a lot to displace any of these cards on the top 5, kind of what we were talking about on our honorable mentions. Drake, do you have anything else you want to add on our way out?
No, I really appreciate you pulling me on here to talk about some red cards. I could talk about red cards for a long time. I mean, love me some red cards. Love me some Bergie. I love playing all of these cards. Every card we talked about today is a card I want in my deck. And the color red, that whole gambling aspect of it that you'll see, I mean, the card that holds the name and, the not obviously broken Breach and Dockside. The rest of the cards that have like some downside to them, some incurred risk, I think that adds a lot of replayability. So these cards, it's really cool to me that we have implementations of cards that don't always just do something broken. They have a real range to them, but they're still strong enough to make the cut in cEDH. And I think that gives cEDH games a lot of diversity as far as how they play out. It's really interesting to me. So really love these top 5. Really excited to talk about red cards, and I appreciate you having me.
Of course, Drake, thank you for joining me on this episode of the Playing with Power podcast. And as always, I would love to have you back anytime. But listeners, did our top 5 match up what you think the most powerful red cards are? I should hope so, because it seems like there's a pretty big delta in between like 5 and 8. So maybe you're wrong. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're right. I don't know. We would love to hear all about it. Leave us a YouTube comment. Hit us up on Twitter. We're pretty easy to find there. Stay tuned for the rest of the colors, because I'm sure those will be coming down the pipeline soon enough. Maybe Drake will be with me. Maybe Ryan will be with me. Maybe it'll be Ryan and Drake. Maybe it'll be Mike and Ashani. Who knows? You never know what you're going to get here on the Playing with Power podcast. But make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised how much it helps people find us. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and more. All links are in the episode notes or the YouTube description. That about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format in our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.